Hello and welcome to Paradigm Playbook, a podcast for entrepreneurs in the business of sports. Your hosts, Dave Kozak and Steve Cook, are business owners, successful entrepreneurs, sports enthusiasts, avid readers, and longtime friends. For years, they've read every business book on the market and built successful companies with what they've learned. This podcast will give you the critical takeaways in just 15 minutes a week. It's a quick and easy playbook for building a winning sports business. And now, here are your hosts, Dave and Steve.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Paradigm Playbooks podcast. Today, we're talking about probably my most favorite subject, which is growth, the growth mindset, kind of the necessity, I would say, of continual growth. And, a lot of times people, when they talk about growth, it's bottom line growth or it's business growth. And to me, it's not, while that is a part of it, growth happens in all ways. You can grow as a leader. You can grow as an employee. You can grow as a parent, father. All of that encompasses what I think is probably one of the most, one of the biggest attributes of successful people is their continued growth.
And I think it's the mindset that it's essential. It's not a choice, that the business isn't going to grow if you don't grow. And it can't just be the bottom line growth. It's got to be all the parts within it. And it can't also be growth in numbers, whereas I know you're intent on growing staff in numbers, but each individual has to have their own growth if that's going to give you the compound effect.
Yeah. And, it's funny because in the beginning of my career, it was all about how many jobs could I create, right? And to me, that was a noble approach to growth. And as I get older and have more and more employees, I find that the way I look at growth now is not just how many people can I hire and employ, but how many people can I bring along? How many people can I make better that are already under my employ? And in doing that, you have to learn and grow yourself. You can't, right? If I become stagnant, then the trickle down effect is stagnation. If I'm continuing to expand and there's different pockets of growth too, right? Sometimes you have to change gears and grow in a different way. And that persistent mindset is to improve, right? Just to constantly improve, whatever it is. That's growth to me, is improvement.
Yeah, I think all the greats over time have had that growth mindset where there was the relentless. So Tim Grover wrote the book Relentless, and Tim Grover, for those that don't know, was coach to Michael Jordan and LeBron James and many of the other great athletes. And the one commonality of all those great athletes is their relentless focus on improvement.
Yep.
And I think that's the only way you can be a great leader. So if we want to look at all the different ways to approach growth, and I think company growth is important, and we can talk about that, but individual and personal growth almost has to come first. So if you're not budgeting in time for personal growth, and and I have this discussion with people that say, like, I'm an accountant, I go to the gym, but during tax season, I'm going to take the gym off. Well, that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
If you're going to continue to grow.
It reminds me, Steve, of a conversation we had, I don't know, maybe 2.5 years ago at this point. And you were spitballing this idea, and it was, you've read all these books and you want to share all this information, and you want to create a business model, or you wanted to just, kind of become a professor, however you want to look at it.
I like teaching.
And you made a comment to me that has stuck with me. And it was, if you want to do something, find the busiest person you know and pick their brain about it or get in their ear about it. Because typically people that are extraordinarily busy have the ability to um, take things on, or busy people have that kind of growth mentality. Now that's not busy just to be busy, right? It's a legitimate busyness. And it was funny when you came to me with that, and I'd never heard it before, that find the busiest person you know and see what they can do.
Kind
And
of regret I ever came.
no, we'll leave that one alone. That's for next podcast. But the reality of that is that's part of growth, right? You get busy and you learn how to manage. You learn how to manage time. You learn how to manage no's. And that's one thing that I think people underestimate in growth is, um, as a society, we're not big in saying no anymore.
Mhm.
I remember when I was growing up, no, there
Yeah.
was just no was a very, very easy response. And, now there's a little bit of the placation that, well, you try and over explain things rather than just give a firm no. And I forget what book it was. And I need to go back through my library and figure it out. But it was basically that in order to grow effectively, you have to learn how to say no, and you
Mhm.
have to be strategic about what you say no to. And if you say no more often than you say yes, your focus becomes better aligned. And, coming back to Paradigm Playbook, when you kind of laid this idea out to me, it was a passion project because it's the same thing. It's that, well, if I can't grow and take all of the lessons learned, and you can't grow and take all the lessons learned and teach them or give them back and create a way to uh I want to say grow other people, but ultimately that's the model, right?
Well, it's so I don't know whether it was the book that you're referring to, but I know Warren Buffett is one of the great ones, and asked about his ability to pick stocks and what companies that he wanted to buy. It's simple. He says, I just say no more than anybody else. So I land on winners because I evaluate it looking for a way to say no to something. So I think whether it's in investing or in your own life, or you're trying to make time, it's your ability to only focus on those things that are maybe your top three priorities.
Hmm.
That's what you're putting yourself. So that focus, I think, is really important to growth.
Yeah, and that goes back to EOS and Gino Wickman, right?
Yeah.
And basically the idea that when you create visions and goals, and then you break it down to rocks that you can do in 90 days, when you're business planning, if you have 15 projects you're taking on, you're just not, you're going to push a lot of projects a very small distance,
Mhm.
as opposed to isolate two or three, and you can push those two or three projects over the finish line. But if you're distracted by the other, 12 projects that are out there, you're going to make very small changes over time.
Yeah, I think you've seen a change in the corporate life. If you go back to the 50s and the GMs and the General Mills, and that said, add,
Hmm.
and now we're to the boutique era of business where it's, let's double down and focus on something we're going to do and grow within that industry. I think, one of the challenges that came through the whole pandemic was that, um, people had less income, less things going on, so they started cutting back,
Hmm.
and they were sacrificing growth for, maintaining profits. And I think, there's a lot of stories, a lot of literature written about the deficiencies of management by cost control.
Hmm.
So I think you got to be careful of that. So
Well, and that reminds me of a presentation I listened to. Two executives were kind of going back and forth, and they were talking about who typically climbs the corporate ladder and becomes the executive. What background do they come from? And it's rare that it is the accounting side of a
mhm,
business that takes the leadership role. And while I think, again, accounting is huge and very important, and understanding cost and cost accounting and managerial accounting is all huge, you cannot govern gut feel based on a spreadsheet. And, there was another presentation was given about, you have to take the risk of believing in yourself. And sometimes that's believing in your gut or your head or your analysis and moving forward, because that's how you grow, right? That's the experience. And there's another lesson in this. It's you either win or you learn, right? You don't fail. I wrote a excerpt for the beginning of our book, and it talked about, basically I credit my success to persistence more than just being really good at anything. I'm persistent. I continued. I pushed through and battled, and I failed so many more times than I've succeeded in things. And but I don't look back on those failures as failures. I learned something from every single one of them. From losing, one of my most valued employees, and going, what am I going to do now? And I probably could have prevented that loss, but I didn't. And so you learn that lesson, and you move along. I think the key is to learn the lesson, put it in the back pocket, and maintain it.
So I think you'll agree with this, that the majority of the companies that we talk to or consult with is due to stagnation, and the stagnation or lack of growth it comes from two things. One is the acceptance, and sometimes it's just flat out being tired.
Yep.
And the leader is now tired, so you have to find a way to grow your energy as well. But the other thing is an acceptance or a dependence on a profit margin that you reach. I know I face it in the corporate world all the time. We got our our net profits, up to about 10, 12%. And it got real comfortable at that level.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're talking about the county side of the business, and the upper executive level of that business loved going to the board meetings and reporting that, that 12% operating profit. So what happened as a result of that, R&D diminished, innovation diminished, hiring diminished, taking chances diminished, and all those things, all those failures that you're talking about are what contribute to growth. You can't grow without, taking some chances.
Yeah. And I think it's a great point too, that, innovation diminishes and the work diminishes, and you may sustain that profit for a year or two or three, but at some point somebody else is coming in, and somebody else is gonna take away a chunk. And that top line profit's going to be, or that bottom line profit's going to be gone, and you're going to have to rebuild as opposed to just ramp up. Right. And so I think there's a mentality that I've had in business that creates agita for some people. But for me, it's a necessary thing, is continuing to push forward in growth by all logical means, right? I don't stop. I can't stop. I don't want to stop. I'm smarter now than I was. I don't take on as big of risks as I used to. But at the same time, I've got to be looking towards the horizon. And this goes back to the advice I got when I bought my first business, which was, if you're worried about what everybody else is doing, you're going to get distracted in that noise. You need to focus on what you need to do and do it well, and continuously improve your own stuff. And I think there is something to be said for competitive intelligence, knowing what's going on. I'm not saying you don't know what's going on in the industry around you. But when you are constantly improving your own business, your own practice, your own processes, you are the innovator in that regard. And when you're innovating, you may end up at a point in the future that, well, I could buy that now, right? Someone else innovated faster, did it, but you're continuing to expand your company's capability or your own personal capability. And I think that is the epitome of growth. I mean, growth and innovation are synonymous. They're part of the same core necessity to get to expand, right?
So I want to bring another book into our discussion, but before I do that, what's your quote on change? you always,
change is vital and improvement is the logical form of change.
yeah. So I think, and so that change is what causes growth and those pivots. So the book that I want to bring in is Blue Ocean Strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I love the book. Um, and they talk about red oceans as the competitive world where everybody's swimming right now. Everybody's fighting for the same business. Blue oceans are, kind of swimming off in the distance and finding areas where no one's competing yet because it's unproven, unknown.
Yeah.
But those changes are what are going to allow you to grow. Now, will every blue ocean attempt work?
Yeah.
No. The other thing is, and I kind of go by, there's an old theory in sports that sometimes it's addition by subtraction, cutting a guy off the team. Well, I kind of take the reverse of that and say subtraction by addition. And I have so many things in my life. And the way to get rid of something that's not as important is to add something that's important.
Yeah.
And it kind of forces something else out. You know what? Since I started reading so much, for some reason, I don't have time for television. So, and it's okay that television got forced out of, most television got forced out of my life, but
Yep.
it's because I'm reading more and the reading is adding to my growth. So,
Yep.
we started this whole podcast by talking about books.
Yeah.
And I think if there's one message that we need to get across to everybody is that, everybody needs to read more. I mean, it's like, and I keep referring to Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett owns the company that I worked for 25 years. So I'm familiar with him, but he reads 5 hours a day. So I don't know what he reads.
Yeah.
He reads 5 hours a day. I can't claim I do that, but I read some every day. It's one of my non-negotiables. I have to read something every day. And that's helping me to grow. Now, at this stage with Paradigm Playbook, and one of the things we talked about, one of our missions early on was to take all that we've learned from, and how can we share that with those that maybe aren't quite as committed yet to reading,
Yeah.
but maybe we'll inspire some people. Maybe we'll help them with a few points here and there. But I think books is a big part of it.
Yeah. It absolutely. And I would argue that today it is easier to read, access, and learn from books than ever before. You can listen to them. You can buy summaries of them. You can buy the books themselves. You can you can get it in so many different versions that you don't have to be a guy that sits in the corner with a hard copy book in your hand to get the information out of it. I think audiobooks are a great way to substitute. You're driving in a car, instead of spending that time listening to something that's not going to add value or create growth, listen to a book, pick one up. I want to make one other comment because I think I love the idea of that, like, importance filter, right? And the easiest way to that subtraction by addition, the easiest way to get something out that really doesn't matter, right? If it's important enough, you find a way. If it's not, you find an excuse.
Yeah.
And so the moment you add something of great importance on the top of the funnel, something unimportant falls out. And I from 2008 to 2012, I don't know that I missed many Phillies games.
Yeah.
I don't know that I missed many. From then until now, I could probably count on two hands how many I've seen. But I replaced it with kids. I replaced it with coaching kids sports. I still have that passion for doing that whole thing. But the TV is a perfect example. It's just something that becomes obsolete if you have more important or fulfilling things to do.
Yeah. And it becomes, one of my goals this year is, I'm crazy about goals and New Year's resolutions. By the way, I set my New Year's resolutions in December 1st, because I like a head start. So I figure I have a head start on everybody. But
Did you get it?
What?
Are you there?
I have them in my head. It's December 1st. I set them for 23. So
Do you start into them right then and
yeah,
there?
yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, so I cheat, but one of them is I want 25 new influential people in my life. So I've got to set out to meet those. So one of the habits that I've developed is contacting the authors of the books I read. You don't always get a response, but so far I've actually met two of them that I set out to meet. And it's just the idea that I'm going to learn, I'm going to get better if I get different opinions in my life. I hear
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah. I think it's a pretty awesome resolution.
So, and another thing about growth in business,
Yep.
and um, to get back to the growth during tough economic times, which people say we're going through right now. I think if you cut back to meet tough economic times, I think you lose um, a little bit of your momentum. And there's no doubt that the best way to have continued growth is not to give up the momentum. If you keep moving, the hardest thing is to get started again. So you have to reinvigorate yourself. So the more you stay to it. So I think what happened is um, the pandemic came, people had less money, so they started cutting back. I think one of the net results of all of that is a decrease in quality customer service in today's
Without question.
marketplace. It's, what? We don't have enough money. We can't hire enough waitresses. You know what? We're going to cut back on the hostess. We're not going to have a hostess at the front. We're not going to have a greeter at Walmart. We're not, so you cut back on the key things that drive your business. Another area that I see people giving up on growth is trying to shrink back in to compete with a low ticket competitor. So if you're going to try to compete with Walmart or Amazon, and there's a place for those businesses, they're great. But if you're running a small business, you can't necessarily. So instead of reducing expenses to try to compete, I'm going to suggest that you step it up and push more towards the boutique. So even in tough economic times, the money's going somewhere. In tough economic, the money is somewhere. You just have to gear your business to attract the money that's out there. So if you're selling, you know, plumbing supplies, you want to go to the quality end of it, not to the low cost end of it, unless you're set out to, compete with Home Depot or, the big ones that have low prices.
Yeah. No, and I think it can be a very difficult thing to stare down the gun barrel of shrinking budgets and, less customers and a contraction across the board. Um, but that's where that growth mindset really comes into play. And we dealt with it ourselves, right? Our entire marketing model was stopped.
Mhm.
We weren't allowed to have seminars. We weren't allowed to gather people. We weren't allowed to do anything. Had to figure out a different way to do it. Pivoted relatively quickly, but the results were far different. We were basically, instead of having 60% success ratio, we were at 30% success because it was a totally new thing, and that continued. And then we sort of opened, and then we sort of closed, and we sort of opened, and we sort of closed, right, from all the rules and regulations. And it was like the stutter stop for the better part of a year, and it really messed with how we attracted clients. And so now we're having to prime the pump again and get the flywheel rolling and go and rebuild all over again. And that's a painful process. I think that momentum piece is crucial. And sometimes face it, sometimes there's not a thing you can do.
Yeah, I love the stories about Tiger Woods, and Tiger Woods has reinvented his swing like 5 times. Most of the times when he was the number one golfer in the world. So when you're sitting on top of the world, if you recognize that a challenge is going to come, are you willing to take that, as you said, stutter step, take that one step backwards to reinvent this so you can move forward? So, when I say the growth should be constant, I'm not suggesting that your revenues will continually increase, but your mindset has to be on growth. You're always looking for the next step. Sometimes it does take a step backwards. So, you have it in the gym all the time. And, I was talking about it recently. It's like, I want to get stronger. I want to do this. Well, I've got to back up, go to a different exercise, go back to a lighter weight, and then build back up. So you can build back up. And all those great ones go back to, Tim Grover, that relentless pursuit of improvement
Yep.
is what's going to push your growth.
Well, and I would also argue that improvement is, well, I wouldn't even say improvement. I would say progress is inertia building. Progress is motivating. Progress is inspiring, and to have progress and a the tailwind pushing you along, it really snowballs. And so there's it's go back to relentless solution focus, right? Because I always do, and I can't help it. But the idea that there's a problem and you got 60 seconds to feel bad about it, and then the next 60 seconds you have to do one thing in that moment to make just a little bit better, just a minuscule improvement. That's your first step towards progress. And then you continue and continue and continue. That idea that progress gets you out of that negative problem centric thought is real, and it creates the momentum that you need. And that momentum and that progress continues to push you further and harder. And Steve, when you do get to back to the weight you want to be able to lift, right? You're going to, that progress will be incredibly motivating in a different way.
Yeah, I think, and I forget the book that emphasized it, but one of the biggest negative to growth can be goals. Because if you set a goal that I want to be able to, bench press 250 pounds, you kind of get a mental relaxation when you do that.
Yeah.
Instead, the great athletes have goals about improvement. And it can be a much lower goal. It can be a 1% growth goal. But if you look at it, if you were to improve, let's say 10 factors in your business, if you improved each of those by 1% per month or per year, or, it's like, I love numbers because in sales, it is all about numbers. So any salesman can reach any level they want if they just look at the numbers, and that's how you grow. So if you're closing 1 out of 10 sales or 30% or whatever you're closing, it's easy to calculate the number that you have to get there. You just, until you're prospecting everybody in the world, you're not there.
Yeah. In the youth sports, one of the teams I coach, we talk consistently about being 1% better. Every time you come into practice, your focus is just get 1% better. You're 1% better today than you were yesterday. You're on the right track. And so again, rather than saying, hey, you need to, up your batting average by, 300 points. No, just get 1% better today and keep doing that every single day. And if you get 1% better, eventually you're going to have some serious gains and improvements.
Yeah. And sometimes you do have to adjust your process goals and say, okay, if I'm going to get 1% better, maybe, if you're using baseball, maybe 50 cuts, 50 hacks a day isn't enough. Maybe it has to go to 100. Maybe you have to swing a weighted bat. Maybe you have to.
Oh, and there's a diminishing return, right?
Right.
I mean, if you're very good, to get better than that, you got to put in more work to get 1% better, right? If you've never picked up a baseball bat, you can get 50% better just by having one lesson with someone that knows how to teach you how to hold a baseball bat, right? So it's a different ball game altogether. But the closer you get to that unattainable perfection, right? Those improvements are harder to come by, but they're more valuable when you do come by them.
Yeah, you know what? And we could take this conversation a lot of directions, and we won't, but for another day, there's 2 directions that you can go. One is the direction of deliberate practice, which is, what you're doing. And the other is grit, which is how hard your
That determination,
stick-to-itiveness. And, there are different factors with equal, effects on how much you're going to grow and how fast you're going to grow. So there's a lot of ways. And I think, what, maybe we should take a subsequent podcast and just talk about deliberate practice. What defines deliberate practice, whether it's in sports or in business or in learning or in education, because you can take deliberate practice. We both know a young man who made it through college in 3.5 years because he developed some habits.
Yeah.
So, so we could tie in atomic habits, keystone habits, deliberate practice into a whole
without
conversation.
Question. And I think there's something else just to add to the growth piece is we talk a lot in our business about being intentional, right? Deliberate, intentional, kind of synonymous. And to me, be intentional in what you're doing. If you want to grow, you have to be intentional on growth, and you have to be, you really have to set those targets and aim for them and be intentional about what you're doing and see it through to the end. You can't grow just arbitrarily, right? You've got to be intentional about it. And I think the practice, the process, all that stuff, be intentional about them, right? Because we, again, going back to the softball and baseball teams that I coach, I talk about practice with intent, right? Practice with purpose. Don't just practice. Don't just get up there and take 5 sloppy swings. Get up there and take 2 really good cuts and think about what you did. Right?
Yeah, I can hear you yelling at Grand Slam. Was that a game swing?
Yeah.
It's you get to the point where you see a swing and it doesn't have the intensity. It's not a game swing. So, and anything that's not a game swing is taking you backwards.
Unless it's a specific drill for a specific purpose, and then you take it with the same intensity that you would approach an at bat in a game and a swing in a game. So again, I think be intentional is a huge thing, and I think that's one of our next topics is that intentional or deliberate practice. So, all right, that's about time for today, Steve.
Dave, before we close, the one thing that maybe we didn't spend enough time on in this, but we talked about growth mindset, and we spent all our time talking about growth. But the key word is mindset.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get too, off this or finish this up without emphasizing that it's you setting your mindset as to where you're going to go, where you want to be. And you can really do anything you want, but it has to happen in the mind first.
Yep.
And then your body, your business will follow.
And since we're going to do it, I mean, might as well drop a book, Mindset by Carol Dweck, which is the static versus the fixed versus the growth mindset, right? Yeah. So don't be static.
Okay.
All right, everybody. That's Paradigm Playbook. Talk to you next time.
Make it a great day.